So the first thing that we're going to take a look at is loading our project. So you might see this light box being up as soon as you start the program. Now if you don't, you can hit the comma key and that brings that up and down and through there, or you might see this button right here for Lightbox. So within Lightbox you've got a whole lot of different things like your recent projects that you've been working on. There's a projects folder, that's the default. Different tools, which are different models within inside of ZBrush, different brushes, textures, there's alphas, materials, there's all kinds of stuff to take a look at. But what I want us to focus on right now is go to the project, and then you should see these three different spheres. If you click on one of these, you can find there's a Dynasphere 128, 64, or 32. And that actually equals out to what is the resolution of one of these Dynaspheres. I'm going to use the Dynasphere 128, so just double click on that. And if you've got a project open already, it's going to ask you if you want to save it. I'm just going to say no. I'm going to go ahead and load this. And what I like about this project is that it puts you with a sphere. It's got DYNAMESH resolution, and it's already set to 128 for that. It's ready to go for remeshing. The other thing is it puts this nice and straight here. You can see we've got this little face icon that shows you that this is the front of the project that you see here like that. And as far as materials go, it puts this matte cap gray on here, and it also takes whatever your screen resolution is and it fills that in for you. So that's the project that I want everybody to take a look at and use and just load that up. So go ahead and load that project up, and then we'll get started for the next part of navigation. Okay, now that we have our scene loaded, let's go ahead and take a look at navigation within the program. And before I do anything, this is maybe a little bit old school, but before we had this little icon up here to help you know what the facing of the project is, I like to draw like maybe two little dots on here. It kind of feels like little eyeballs or something like that, but that helps me to know like what I'm looking at as I'm rotating around. Okay, so just click and draw on there. I am using the standard brush. We'll get into the brushes in just a little bit, but let's go ahead and take a look at navigation for this, okay? So in ZBrush, what they've done is if you just click and drag in the open viewport, that's going to let you rotate around the model. And if you want to rotate about a very specific point, you can just tap on the model, like that part of the eye, and you can see that becomes the new center rotation point, okay? So this is rotation. Just go ahead and click and drag. And if you take a look at the interface, if you see this outer band that's out here, if there's ever this situation where the model is like way bigger than everything that you got going on in the screen, they give you this outer edge that you can always do the controls with for that. I'm going to just tap F real quick for that. We'll get into zooming in just a second. So right now, just go ahead and click and drag and then rotate around and get yourself comfortable with that. Okay? And so the next part that we'll add to that, if you hold down the Alt modifier and then click and drag, we've got a pan. So we can rotate around. We can hold down Alt and we can pan, so we can kind of go this way like that. And something else about rotation. If we rotate and we want to snap to a side view, you can hold down Shift and that'll snap like this. And you can see this icon up here is going to show us now we're in a side view. If I hold down Shift, I can snap here. So what I'm really doing is rotating just a little bit first and then adding the Shift modifier. You can hold it down, but it might be a little bit confusing for you to move your cursor around and get it to snap to those views. So what I like to do is if I'm going to go to like a top view, I start rotating towards the top view and then hold down Shift, and you can see it snaps there. And I can go back down towards the front, hold down Shift like that. Okay, so now I'm holding down Alt and I'm panning around. So I would just get used to that. Just try that for a little bit, those two different movements. So you're just clicking and dragging to rotate, Alt, and that's going to pan around for you. And then after you get comfortable with that, the next part that we're going to do for this is if you want to zoom in and out, you can do Control, right click, and that will have you zoom in and out. Okay, so now with those different things we can zoom out, and what I showed you earlier, if you tap F, that's going to frame in on that. So again, Control right click, we can zoom out and we can zoom in. And what I'm doing with my hand motion, I'm just moving in an up and down motion while I have my Wacom pen, and it's just hovered over the top of the cursor. You can actually touch the screen if you want to, or your tablet. Either way, doesn't really matter. And again, we tap F to frame in on there. So if you can get used to that, try that out. The other thing that I notice is if you right click and just hover over here, or you right click, you can do a rotation for that. Okay, So again, Alt with this is going to pan. If we just click and drag, we got rotate, and if we hold down Control and right click, we've got zooming in and out for that, just like that. So this next part that I'm going to show you for zooming in and out, this is the more advanced method, and this is what existed in ZBrush at the very beginning before they added the Control right click. I find it pretty easy to do because I've been doing this for so long, but what you do is this. If you remember, for holding down Alt and we are able to click and drag, we can pan around. What I would do is I would go in an up and down motion and then just let go of Alt, and that turns into zoom like that. Now it is gonna feel very weird for you when you first do this, but after you get the habit of it, it's just really holding down Alt, click, and drag. Alt, click, and drag like that. But you have to just release things in the right order. So first you're holding down Alt, then you're dragging, and then you let go. But if you can get that motion down pretty quickly, it just happens very, very fast like that. Okay, and then the last thing that I'll show you is if you hold down Shift and you click and drag, and I'm going in an up and down motion like this, and then I let go of Shift while I still have the pin pressed down and I'm applying pressure, I can roll the camera too. So sometimes that comes in handy, but not necessarily always for you, okay? And then also about perspective, you can see that we have perspective turned on. If you hover your cursor over this, you can see the hotkey for that is P. Now if you tap P, it'll turn perspective off and it'll put it in this orthographic mode. So basically ZBrush just has one camera and you can go in and out of perspective and orthographic. So whenever we are out of perspective, and you can see this is turned off, if we hold down Shift and we can snap to a front view, and again I'm going to move towards the right of the model, hold down Shift and snap, I'll go towards the top of the model, hold down Shift and snap. That's how we can get orthographic front. This is the left, right, we got back right here, top, and we got a bottom like that. And I'm just holding down Shift as I snap like that. So that should, I'm going to tap P to turn perspective on. That should give you everything that you need for navigation. Now, I think it is quite a bit different than a lot of different programs out there. So just take a little bit of time and try that out for yourself. And just make sure you understand how to navigate using the program. Navigation is going to be a huge component of what you're doing because you need to constantly move and rotate your view to check what it is that you're doing from a sculptural base. Okay, now that we know something about navigation, let's go ahead and take a look at how we can start sculpting and some of the brushes that we have within here. So you can see by default you should be using the standard brush that's up here. And if you want to get to the brush menu, you can tap B and you can find a lot of different brushes inside of ZBrush. We're not going to cover all these obviously, but we're going to cover some of the ones that are most used. And the first one that we'll take a look at is the standard brush. So the way that this menu works, you tap B, it opens up everything, and you can see that we've got these letters here. So we want to use the standard brush. So if I tap S, it's going to isolate all the different brushes that are used with the letter S there. And if you want to check out the hotkey for that, you can go U for standard right there like that. So we could go B, S, U. And if you follow that type of pattern for all these different brushes, you could just use hotkeys to get to them if you wanted to. Okay, so on the standard brush, the first thing I'm going to do is push this over here. You should see a marker on this side and that little tick on the other side. And if you don't, you can tap X. So X turns on and off symmetry. And if we just click and draw on the model, you should see that we've got this to where it raises up. Now yours might look a little bit different. Yeah, it's probably going to look like this, and you might see this weird little line following behind it. That's actually a feature called Lazy Mouse, and what I want to do is show you how to use the menu here. So we'll double click this and you can open, and you can double click and close those. You can do this on that side, and you can do it on this side as well. By default, the tool menu should be open, and that's whatever the model is that you're working on. So we'll open this up here, and probably you should see this whole brush menu that's over here. What I'm going to do is have you take a look at stroke. So if we come up at the top here, this is all alphabetical. If we go to stroke, there's a whole menu for that. And if you take a look at this little circle icon with the arrow out of it, if you click and drag that, we could dock it over to this side, or we could drag it over to this side. I'm going to drag it over here and release. And so we should be able to see the stroke menu on here. And if we open up Lazy Mouse, we can turn this off. It's on by default with the standard brush. Now that's going to change the behavior quite a bit. So now if I click and drag on it, it's really going to have a big effect on this thing and really pull this thing out quite a bit. Okay, so that's adding to things, and you can see we've got a Z add up here. So that's adding to the surface. And if we hold on Alt, it's the same thing as clicking this Z sub. So if I hold on Alt, I'm going to push in like that, and that's going to dig into the model. If I let go of Alt, and if I just drag on here, I can draw that on there like that. Okay, so take a look at what we've made, and if we hold down Shift, we can smooth out the surface on here like that. Okay, so try that out for just a little bit. See what you get with that. Try digging in. Try raising the surface up just a little bit. And then after you get comfortable with that, the next thing we're going to do is go back here. We'll turn on Lazy Mouse and see what that does. It does change the behavior of the brush. Okay, so the other thing I want to tell you about is the draw size. So if we tap S and then click and drag left and right, we can control the size of the brush, or you can hold down S and you can click and drag like this. So I'm going to make my brush size a little bit smaller, and then I'm going to draw along through here. Okay, and you can see with that Lazy Mouse, it tries to average out your mouse strokes, or your we're using a tablet probably for that, and it averages those out, and it kind of smooths that that arc out. It's going to be a whole lot more noticeable if we do this. So this lazy steps, I don't know if you've used Photoshop before, but the way that their brush system works, there's a spacing in between their brushes, and so it's like dot, 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 dot whenever you draw a stroke like this. The spacing in between, if it gets really, really close to each other, it just feels like a continuous line after it's done. So that same thing's kind of happening right here with this Lazy Mouse. If I put the lazy step up pretty high, you can see it's going to be dot, 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 dot like that. I like to pull that thing down to almost 0. You could pull it down to 0 if you want, maybe 0.01, and you can input numeric values if you want into there. So when I drag that out, you can see it's going to be really, really smooth. Problem with that is because there's so many brush strokes over the top of one another, it kind of makes it more intense. So if you want to change the intensity of the brush, you can see that we've got here this Z intensity right up here. So you can move the slider like that. That's one way that you could do it. The other thing is there's a hotkey for it. You can tap U, and then I'll give you the slider just like this, and then now I can do this intensity just like that. You can see that right there. And if I want to drop it down, I can tap U again, drag it down a little bit lower, and then this is the intensity that I've got. If I want it higher, just drag it to the right, and we've got something like this. So I think for me, I want the intensity probably around 15, somewhere in there, like that. And I think that's pretty cool like that. Okay, so that's the lazy step. If we do a lazy radius, and I'm going to put this up to something pretty high, like 45, something like that, and I'm going to do the lazy smooth to about 8, and that's how smooth that kind of makes the line quality. Now if you draw with this and drag out, you can see it's going to behave much different. I'm going to put the lazy radius up even higher, something like this, and you can see that line really drags behind quite a bit, like this. Okay, so the hotkey for turning Lazy Mouse on and off is L, so you can see that turn on and off. And so again, that different type of behavior that we want. So I just increased my brush size. I'm going to draw this like smile kind of thing going on here, and I'll do another one right down below. And then what I'm going to do is hold down Shift and kind of smooth this out so it ends kind of nicely for me, like that. And then maybe I'll just drag this up like that right here. I'm gonna hit undo real quick. So let's do this over again. I'm gonna hold down Shift, and you can see how I can make that a little bit stronger in through there. I'm gonna hold down Shift as I smooth some of this stuff out like that. Okay, and again, if I tap L and turn lazy mouse off, it's gonna have a much different effect for how the brush kind of builds up. So what I'd like for you to do is just try some of this a little bit. See what you think for it. I'm just going to do this and hold down Alt and do a little thing for a nose right there like that. And yeah, so I'll tap L, turn lazy mouse back on, make the brush size quite a bit smaller, and then I'll hold down Alt, and then I can do a nice crisp line like that, and then maybe smooth some of the results out after I'm done, right there like that. Now when you hold down Shift, you really are changing it to a different brush, so you might want to smooth with a different size on there like that. So try that out and see what you think about just those components, because really for sculpture, this is the basic stuff right here, right? So you're going to add to the surface, you subtract from the surface, and you're going to smooth it out. And that's really what you're going to be doing with a lot of the different brushes that you have. So go ahead and try all those out as a few different options and work on that for just a little bit. So a really cool feature that ZBrush has that I wish a lot of other programs had is undo history. So if you take a look up here after you start doing different operations, you can see this line kind of builds up, and you can actually step through this history and go back to an earlier stage. So what it allows you to do is be a little bit more free about what you're doing with you know, some of your designs and things like that, and explore. And if you don't like maybe some of the results here, you can kick this back, and I'll just go all the way back to before I put this mouth on here. And if I want to start sculpting from this stage, I'll just put it on my brush and then start to sculpt, and it's going to give you this little prompt here, and it's going to tell you basically, hey, you're stepping back in history, and if you start sculpting from here, it's going to basically erase all the history from there. So it's like going back in time and then making a new choice for that. And if you're okay with it, just hit OK like that. And now I can continue to sculpt on here. And you can see if I hold down Alt like we were doing before, we can just do that. So I think it's a really cool feature. I just wanted to make sure that I'm calling that out for you and you understand that's available to you. All right, now that we know a little bit about sculpting, some undo history, let's also take a look now at remeshing. And so what that has to do with is rebuilding topology. So if I turn on the poly frame over here, and this is a really good thing to note, if you hover the cursor over that, Shift F is the hotkey to turn that on and off. And this allows you to see the actual geometry that you're working with. Now, if we've got a really dense mesh, it's going to be really dense to the point you won't even see these polygons. But right now we're working with this DYNAMESH resolution of 128, and we shouldn't go up too high yet at the very beginning. But you can see I've stretched out the polygons on here by making this nose. Now, if I start to try to sculpt along here and get predictable results, the more I stretch out these polygons, it's going to do some weird stuff to the surface. And what we can do is remesh. And by doing that, instead of turning this button like on and off and doing that, what they've allowed the ability to do is hold down Control and then drag in the open viewport while DYNAMESH is on, and then that will remesh for you like that. And so it might be a little bit hard to see what's going on, so let's do this. I'm going to go ahead and shift and smooth that out after I drew that, and I'll hold down Control and I'll drag and make sure it doesn't touch the model, and you can see the geometry kind of jump just a little bit. So that's the remesh process, and it's actually making new topology for you. So I'm going to tap L. Remember, we're going to turn lazy mouse off, and I'll just show you something here. I'm just going to build this up, tap S, and then make my brush size really large, and then I'll make this really big shape that maybe it's going to start to be an ear or something like that, right? So that's problematic. You can see how it's stretching the geometry. I'll hold down Control, and drag and release, and it'll remesh. So if you ever get into the situation where it feels like maybe this is not remeshing for you, as you get more geometry, it might be a little bit difficult to actually see the process. What I normally like to do is go over here to the geometry, go to DYNAMESH area, make sure the DYNAMESH is turned on, number one, and then if you have this polyframe on, go ahead and remesh like this. And usually I just drag twice because we're not into this part yet, but if you hold down control, you can paint a mask on a model. In order to remesh, if you hold down control and drag like we were doing, it releases the mask first, and then you need to control drag again to remesh. So sometimes it might be possible on the model, if your brush is really small, you might have accidentally held down control and maybe there's a little tiny mask on there, and you need to do this twice. So normally when I remesh, I just do it twice, and I'm in the habit of doing that. It's not really that big of a deal, and it goes by pretty quick. So that should give you what you want for remeshing. Now I will say this, as you start to see you're building up your forms and the polygons are starting to get really big on screen for you and it's time for you to go up to the next level, you can just take the slider and you can start dragging it to the right. So I'm not going to go too high on this. I'm going to go from 128 to 256, and I'm going to remesh like this. And sometimes I've noticed ZBrush does not take this change. Normally what I do with this is just hold down shift and then just smooth some little tiny part on the model to make sure there's a change and it registers that, and then I do that and I can remesh at that point. And you can see as it up-reses, you're going to maybe have to hold down shift and then just kind of smooth out the results. So that's a way that you can step up in resolution whenever you're ready, and I wouldn't suggest working with too much geometry at the very beginning. Just work kind of slowly with things and then build that up. So that should give you everything that you need for making sure you have DYNAMESH turned on, how you can remesh, and how you can increase the resolution. You can always go back down with the resolution, but you're going to lose that detail. It's not like it's held or anything like that. So if I remesh and go back down, I can do that. But any like high level detail that I made, there's no way to get that back. So it is a destructive process. Just know every time that you remesh, it is a destructive process and it is changing your topology. But whenever you're doing this initial just laying things out and doing concept sculpting and just enjoying making forms, it's a really awesome tool to have at your disposal. Okay, it's time to start taking a look at some of the different various brushes that we have inside of ZBrush, and I'm going to walk you through that. But at the same time, I'm also going to show you how to start building your own custom interface. Okay, so if you want to grab an interface of mine that I've made in the past, I do have some stuff set up on Gumroad. So if you go to nickzook.gumroad.com, you can go and find a lot of different tools and things like that that I've got. Some things are free and some things, you have to pay for them or whatever. But on here, I've got a bunch of different interfaces. This is the one that I use, and it's a bit more complicated. Because we're starting this thing together, my plan is to take the interface that I developed for this series of getting started and offer that, and I'll put this as an interface that you can download within through here. So if you wanted the complex one, as you get a little bit more advanced with ZBrush, you can have access to that too, but then you can also have access to this very simple interface. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started on this, and I've just loaded up a blank project again. Remember, if we tap the comma key, we can go to the light box, we can go to project, and I really like to use this Dynasphere 128 and just double click that and load that up. We also tapped X to turn on symmetry for this. We've already looked at the standard brush. We've already looked at how we can tap B and we can up the brush menu, and if we want to do standard, we can tap S, and that'll limit the brushes that we're looking at. And if we want to click the hotkey for that, we can do U. So any of these brushes that I'm about to show you, we can do that. Okay, so the first thing is if we use the standard brush, if I go to the brush menu, and I've got this open over here, so if you double click this and open this, this will give you a slot, and if you don't see it, you can go to brush. Remember, we can take this little icon here and click and drag that, and we can dock this over to the right, or we can dock it to the left. I'm going to dock it over to the left, just drag it and release it there like that. And what I like to do for the interface is there are some icons that are much smaller, I guess you could say. After you use the standard brush, you'll probably see them load up over here like this. And if you want to drag this and make a custom interface, there's something that we have to enact with the preferences. So let's go to Preferences, and we'll go to Config, and then we'll say Enable Customize. And you can see the interface is going to shift a little bit whenever we do that. That's just to let you know that you're in this mode that you can start to affect the interface. So if I want to move these icons around, I can hold down Control Alt and I can click and I can drag, and I'll drag that into this slot right here like that. And you can see it's either going to push it up or down. I'm going to push it right there like that and have it sit just like that. And if you ever want to get rid of these things, you can hold down Control and Alt and click and then drag it back into the interface like that. So something else to conserve space on the interface, if you go to Preferences and you go to Interface right here, they've got these wide buttons and you can turn that off. And you can see it's going to give us this much smaller icon that we can grab. Same process, Control Alt, I'll click and drag that, and I can drag this right down here like that. And you can see that's going to give me a much smaller icon. And to be honest, whenever you start to get a little bit more advanced, you're going to want smaller icons so you can fit as many tools on this area as you possibly can. I populate everything within through here, so that's something to take into consideration. The other thing is the lazy mouse. So that exists under stroke, and again, if you don't see that here, you can just go ahead and go to stroke and then click, and then we can drag and we can dock this. So just get used to that. You can open up the lazy mouse area and you can see that we've got the controls for lazy mouse. So I do think that this is worth having on your interface. Because we're adjusting everything and trying to get everything kind of laid out, what I'm going to do is just go ahead and Control Alt drag this maybe to about this area, somewhere in here. We're going to reposition this stuff a little bit later, but I want that. And even if we are not using the options for some of this stuff, they're grayed out, but you can still drag that to the interface. So I'm going to do Control Alt, and what I want for this is the lazy step. For this, I think I'll put this maybe down here like this, yeah. And then I'll do lazy smooth, and I'll do lazy radius. Okay, and that should give me everything that I need for lazy mouse, being able to turn that on and off and getting to the options for that pretty easily. Something else to note about this, anytime you have something on the interface and you're starting to use maybe somebody else's interface and you don't know where stuff sits, you can hold down Control, and you can see at the bottom it says button path, and it tells you exactly where that thing sits. So if I go to lazy mouse, you can see that sits under the stroke palette, and it's under the lazy mouse menu component right there like that. So again, if you ever want to know where it sits default in the program, go ahead and take a look at that way. Okay, so that's a real quick overview of how we can start building the interface and moving those parts around. Now I'm going to focus a little bit more on the brushes that we want to use. So for the next brush that I want to show you, that I'm going to put in here, I think this is a really awesome brush, Damien Standard. So if we tap B and then go to D, and then we go to Dam Standard, or Damien Standard brush, let's go ahead and click on that, and you can see that that's going to load it. This is the brush that we have now at that point. And it might be a little bit tough to kind of see in this little interface in here, but this is highlighted right there like that. So I'm going to grab it, I'm going to hold down Control Alt, click, and then drag right here, make sure it's pushed up all the way like that. So for this brush, what I think is really cool about it is if you looked from a side profile of this brush, it's got an alpha, and it kind of does this. Here's the alpha shape that's driving this. So it's nice and soft. It gets to a really crisp point and then goes soft out again. So as you're sculpting, think about this being like maybe a shape of one of those birds that you draw in the sky, like the little shorthand for it. But what that equals out to is whenever we draw on the surface like this, it does this really nice pillow effect on the outer part, and it digs in on the inner part. Okay, so it produces this really cool look like that. I do have lazy mouse turned on for this one. I'm not going to control the steps and everything. I'm just going to go ahead and sculpt with this. Now if you hold down Alt with this, the default of this is pushing in, so you can see it's on Z sub. So if we hold down Alt, it starts to dig up and build edges like this. So if you use this tool correctly, you can get really nice detail. If the brush is small, you can do things like wrinkle details and things like that. But if you make the brush size larger, and you can make it really large, like this, you can start to push the surface in, and then if you hold down Alt, you can start to raise the surface, and you can build really crisp kind of hard edge details on there. So I think it's a really super versatile brush. I like this one quite a bit, and for detailing and things, I use this one a whole lot. So maybe try this out, try out the different options for this brush, and see what you think about it. But this is my slot. This is my number 2 brush that I like to use. Remember before, I'm going to go ahead and control drag and I'll just remesh this, but before I do that, I'm going to crank the resolution up to 256. Then I'll drag again and then hold down shift and then just smooth some of this stuff out. Okay, so there's the Damien Standard brush. The next brush that I'll show you is clay. I like clay tubes. A lot of people use clay buildup, so let's do clay buildup. Let's try that. So we'll tap B and then tap C, and then let's find clay buildup. Clay tubes is right next to it. You can try both of these out. They have a little bit different behavior. I think clay tubes kind of feels like you're laying down these little strips of clay. So if you've done anything with traditional clay and you've made your own little strips and kind of lay those down, maybe it feels like that. I really like this one for muscle striations and things like that, but maybe that's a little bit too advanced for what we're doing right now. So I'll do this clay buildup, okay? So again, depending on where it throws this thing at, we've got clay buildup here. Here's the big icon. We've got this one here. I'm going to hold down Control and Alt and then drag this out right here like that. And then I'm going to use clay buildup. And let's take a look at what this one does. You can just lay this thing out. I can tap L and turn lazy mouse off, and you can see maybe there's a little bit different behavior on that. But this is really good for just building up forms like this and then holding down shift. I do think this has a little bit more of an organic kind of feel to it, and you can see how it maybe it's going to be just a little bit lumpy. But I think it's, again, I think it helps to kind of build these forms that feel a little bit more organic. Okay, so maybe what I would do, I'm holding down shift obviously to smooth this thing out, but that could really build the surface up. And if you're happy with what you've sculpted and you want to accentuate the forms, then maybe I go back to Damien Standard. And you can see how we're starting to build this interface, and now it makes it really easy for us to come down here and just select this stuff. I'm going to dig into this a little bit like that and really kind of pull out those forms. I'm going to do this like that. And yeah, so I think just even with those small combinations like that, you can get quite a bit of a different results. And if you remember, we went to the standard brush. This one's pretty good for, you know, just digging in. Got lazy mouse turned off for that. We already looked at that, and we can do details like this, remesh, maybe smooth this thing out. Let's go a little bit smaller for something like that. So we're already making something that I think is, you know, some cool looking forms. So I'm just going to dig in, holding down Alt, push up, remesh like that. And if we want to come back through with Damien Standard and highlight some of these forms or things like that, we have the ability to do that. So I think even with this, you can go organic, and it can start to feel like you're doing some like mechanical kind of forms. So I do want you to just play around with that just a little bit, see what you think about those options for that. And again, if you tap B and then go to C, maybe you got clay tubes, and I could just show you, depending on what you want. This one does feel to me like we're laying down more like strips on the thing. So if you want that, depending on which one you want, you could choose either one. Okay. All right. So the next brush that I'm going to use is the move brush. This is basically like doing large proportional changes. So let's tap B and then go to M, and then we've got a couple different move brushes. Let's just use the regular default move that you see here. Here's the icon, and we can see it's highlighted. Control Alt, click drag, and we got this here. So we got that built up for our interface. Now with this one, if the brush size is pretty small, you can see we can click and drag out like this, and we could do stuff like spikes or something like that. And if we remesh, we got something like this going on. So you can do this. Instead of dragging out, you could you can push the surface in. Now if you hold down Control while you're doing this, it pushes by the surface normal. So it's going to push straight out or push straight in. Either one like that. Okay. So the next part is making sure if we change the brush size to something that's pretty large. So I'll just hold down S or tap S and drag this and make it really large. And then now I can push this to a side view, and you can see that we've got this virtual clay, which is really cool. So now we can really start to affect the overall shape of this. And maybe if I want to push it into some kind of like weird creature head or something like that, we've got the ability to do that. And so if I come to the front view, I can really squish this thing in. So this is where I think this is pretty fun, right? And we have talked about remeshing, and this is where remeshing becomes important. So I'm just dropping down the size of this to start tweaking these shapes. This is really fun to play with the shapes, but after we push it so much, we got the polyframe on there. Remember Shift F for that. And if we want to remesh, Control drag. I just usually do it twice, just to make sure if there's a mask on there, we can release the mask. And yeah, so this move brush is going to be really good for doing these large proportional type of changes on things. Okay. All right, so the next brush that I'm going to show you is H polish, and this is a flattening type of brush. So if we go to B and then go to H, we've got an H polish right there. I'll go ahead and select that, and here it is on the interface. Control Alt drag that out like that. This one will let you polish from one side of an edge like this. So let's say I polish here and I come on the other side of this. You can see that I can start to flatten that out, and I can make a really crisp edge between the two of them. Now I'll just kind of smooth around here like that. Then I'll remesh, maybe keep smoothing. So depending on what you're trying to do with things, again, this is really good for having an edge on one side and an edge on the other. And if you want to make this thing super hard edge like this, you can polish on one side and then polish on the other, and then remesh like that. Okay, so there's that. The next brush I'm going to show you is another polish brush. So let's take a look at this. Go to B, then go to P, and then just so this is just the regular polish. So hold on Control Alt and click and drag that out. Now this one kind of works on the surface, and if you, from what I understand, you do this kind of in a circular motion like this to, I don't know, imagine you had sandpaper or something like that on your surface, and you could kind of rub that around to kind of flatten things out or knock things back a bit. So maybe a combination of that polish together with holding down Shift and then smoothing afterwards can kind of clean a surface up a little bit and make it a bit more smooth at that point. If I hold down Alt, that does change the behavior of this too. You can see it almost kind of raised the surface up, and now I can let go of Alt and push this down, and I'm kind of flattening all this stuff out and making that look pretty clean. Okay, so there's the polish brush. The next one I'm going to show you is inflate, and if we do B and then I, and then let's find inflate, and let's find where it's selected on the interface, Control Alt, and I'll drag that out just like that. Now inflate does exactly what it sounds. Imagine we're just pumping air into like a little part, like a balloon, and kind of blowing that up. What's pretty interesting with this is that it makes surfaces run into each other like this. So maybe I want this to go like this. What I would suggest is remeshing after blowing this up a little bit. And if I want those surfaces to really touch each other, I'm just lightly tapping along through here. And now that's, you see how that's running into each other, and it's making this really crisp edge. Now, the reason whenever I remeshed it did what it did was because there's just not enough resolution. So I'm going to be a little bit careful. I do think this is a little bit chunky. I can start to raise this up just a little bit more, and there's no perfect number for this. I just raised it up a little bit, and I'll remesh, and you can see the results of that get better. The danger is if we start working with too much resolution too quickly. If you're experienced, it's not going to be that big of a deal for you, but if you're kind of new, it does, I think it becomes a little bit more problematic for you. But you'll start to get the hang of like whenever you need more geometry for things and you're really wanting a really crisp surface. So I would really suggest, doing large proportional changes with the move, getting the overall shape going. Once that's going, then you start to do we're now kind of moving into somewhat secondary-ish details on things. Okay, so that's the inflate brush. Next one I'll show you is the layer brush. So we tap B and then go to L, and here's layer. So we'll go ahead and select that. I'm going to try to find this on the interface, Control Alt, click and drag this over just like that. And then layer brush looks at your intensity, and then it builds up and it only lets it go to a certain spot on there. So if you want to do something that felt like paneling or something like that, that could be really good for that. And again, the height of this matters. Like if I put this on 100% and I start to push this as hard as I possibly can, it builds up to this certain height on there. I think it can be useful. Let's drag this back down to like 30 or so. So a combination, like you might see it works pretty good, but then maybe there's still a little bit left over on the surface that needs to be cleaned up. Remember our polish brushes. This is where you could maybe polish the surface out and smooth it out, and you can get rid of that. But the layer brush works pretty good for doing some of that kind of stuff. So that might be useful for you. The next thing I'm going to put on here is the morph brush, and this one it's going to be pretty advanced for a new user, and you're going to have to wrap your mind around some concepts. So let's just do this. Let's do B and then M, and let's grab the morph brush. And here it is on the interface. Control Alt, click and drag that over like this. And in order for us to use this brush, it says it requires a morph state. So if you go over here into your tool area, there's a whole section for morph target. And if we click store, it's going to basically take a snapshot of the geometry that we have and store it into memory and let us do things with it in just a little bit. So I'm going to use it almost as like an eraser tool. And I'll show you what that means in just a second. So I'm going to click store morph target. And if we store a morph target, you can switch between the different states, like the state that you're holding, and then if you do some sculpting, it's going to have that other state. There's some stuff for deleting the morph target, so that frees it up and you can make a new one. And there's also this create difference mesh, and it'll make a mesh based off the differences that you sculpted. So if I stored a morph target before I made this panel, and then made this panel, and then said create difference mesh, it would actually make a new subtool or a new object based off of this new panel that we made. So maybe that becomes useful for you. I do want this in the interface. So I'm going to hold on Control Alt, and I'll just drag this out, and I'll just put it here for now. Again, I think the positioning of all this is going to change. I'm going to hold down Control Alt. I do want the switch ability, and I'll hold down Control Alt, and I want to delete the morph targets on there. And I would like this morph slider, but it's pretty big on the interface, so you can see like basically what it's going to do at that point. So if I drag that out, I think it's worth having, but it just starts to take up quite a bit of space. Okay, so I stored the morph position on here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to inflate. Actually, I'm going to move this. Okay, so let's just do some big changes to this. All right, like that. Maybe pull this out just a little bit. Okay, and so that's quite a bit of big changes. Now if we remesh, it's going to destroy the morph targets, because if you've ever worked with another program and you've used blend shapes or morph targets, whatever they call it, it's actually looking at the vertex order or the amount of polygons that are on here. And if you remesh, it's a destructive process, so it changes the topology. So for this brush to work, you can't remesh. So you can see I can switch between the two different states that we have for the morph brush, like this. And what we can do is if we have the morph brush, it allows you to sculpt back to that original position. So maybe we could start to blend the results of the original state and this new state. And you can, again, you can brush these things in, right? So if you've got surface detail on there or something like that, and you want to very lightly push that back in, you can do that. So if I wanted to be not so heavy-handed with this, I could take the Z intensity, or you can tap U and change it that way. And now I can just lightly sculpt in some of those changes. So it'll allow you to do some changes and then maybe get an in-between for what those changes are. Again, I was saying this is a little bit more advanced, but I use it enough on things that I think it's worth having on the interface. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to show you, and we can delete the more target if you don't want that anymore, I'm going to show you trim dynamic. So if we go to B and then go to T and then find trim dynamic right here, let's get this on the interface, Control Alt, I'll drag that out just like that. And on this brush, this one's really cool. I really like this quite a bit for making angles on things. So if you take a look at my brush and I hover it over the surface, you can see it changes the surface orientation on that. So this brush works off of that surface orientation that you have. And you can see I could flatten this right in through here like that. If I wanted to fill in a hole, I could hold down Alt and I could drag that out. I could make my brush size, oops, sorry. Make my brush size really small, hold down Alt, and I could push that up like that. So this one is really cool for, you could do hard edge, kind of hard surface stuff on there. That's one thing you could do. The other thing you could do, I'm just remeshing right now, is I see people use this a lot for making rock structures and things. So I'm just going to start carving away from this, holding down Alt, at times raising the surface up, pushing that in. And again, if I was treating this as a maybe a rock surface, this is helping me make really big, large planes on things. So I'll just smooth that out a little bit like that. The other thing that this brush is really good for that I see people use all the time is if you're trying to add damage to something or age something. Let me get rid of the mask there and remesh. So I'll make the brush size really small for this, and then here's where you can go along edges and you can just kind of chip away at edges. So if you're doing rock structures, it feels like maybe that surface got chipped right there and a part of it broke away. So you can do some stuff like that. Again, depending on the size of the brush that you're using, you can get a whole lot of different types of effects with what you're doing on there. So I think this is a really cool brush to be using. The next one I'm going to show you, and I think this will be the last brush that we go through on here, is Snake Hook. So Snake Hook is a pretty wild brush. Let's go B and then S, and then let's find our Snake Hook right here. And so it tells you this brush is best performed with Sculptors Pro mode activated. Yeah, that little button here turns that on, but you have to know something about the surface. Let me just show you what this does, okay, real quick. So depending on your brush size, we can drag this out and it's gonna make geometry like this. Pretty cool. Now before DYNAMESH existed, you can see how nasty this topology is. After DYNAMESH, you can just drag this thing out, remesh, and you can see it's gonna make some new geo for us pretty quickly, like this. Now, if you want to avoid this whole remeshing process, what they're talking about with the Sculptors Pro mode, if I turn that on, you can use Snake Hook, and it just makes geometry for us. But here's the thing that's going on with this. If we take a look at the polyframe, it's got a certain resolution to this, and basically what's happening with Sculptors Pro you've got this subdivide size. And if I drag the slider to the left, I can get more geometry to build up with this. So I don't want too much, and this is where you got to be a little bit careful, because if you're a new user, I don't want you to overdo this. Now, since Sculptors Pro mode is on, if I hold down Shift, it's actually smoothing and making new geometry too. So I can actually reduce some of the polygon count on this. So what you'd want to do is find something that's matching where you're at for the topology, like how much geometry you need. And so I think it's pretty neat what's going on here with this. You just have to know what's happening. It's a little bit more advanced, so I would be just a little bit careful with that. So I was trying to inflate, and I have noticed Sculptors Pro with inflate does some things that are a little bit odd. So maybe I'll just turn that off and then remesh like that. And so this is really good for doing some obviously alien, funky, tendril kind of things, stuff like that. I'm going to go back in the undo history before we did that. The one thing that I found from a ZBrush user of mine that I follow that I like, Cedric Surratt, I'm not sure if that's the exact pronunciation, Chaos Masons, he's one of the members of that. But I saw what he does with the snake hook brush, and I think I forgot to grab that. Control, Alt, click and drag that on the interface. What he does with this brush is makes it really, really large and uses it like a move brush. And you can see you can do really big proportional changes. This feels way different than the move brush, but it's more organic, so it's kind of fun for finding shape and doing shape exploration on things. Try it out and see what you think of this. Obviously, if you're doing some weird alien concept stuff, this stuff works really well for shapes like this. And I don't know if I'm gonna do something like maybe that ends up being like a mouth structure. So I do think this program is so fun because you can just do shape exploration like this. There is the possibility that you have happy accidents, and that happens a lot in the real world when you're working with real world materials. I wouldn't say it happens quite as much in the digital world, but there are some tools like this that I feel like helps you with that process. So I'm just going to blow this up just a little bit more like that. And yeah, so there's a quick rundown of all the different brushes, and really there's so many more brushes within ZBrush. You can tap B and you can see there's tons and tons of brushes. But really what I've found for me with this limited brush set, I can pretty much build just about everything that I need, and everything else is kind of just icing on the cake or very specialized kind of workflows that I might be doing for stuff. Okay, so there's a rundown of the brushes. The last thing I need to show you to finish out this interface, and I'm not going to leave it in this state. I'm going to clean this up. There's a few more things that I'm going to keep adding to this interface as we continue on and learn more about ZBrush. But if you're done with an interface, you can come up to Preferences and you can go to Config and you can click off the Enable Customize, and it puts it back in this mode. And now if you want this to load with ZBrush, every single time you start ZBrush, you can click Store Config. Okay. The other thing is you can load other people's UIs, and you load it this way, and you can save your UI. So if you make changes to a UI, even a custom one that somebody else has given you, like the one that I'm providing, you can always change it and then save UI. My suggestion to you is to save the UI. I work off the cloud, and what I've got for myself is I've got a ZBrush tools area and custom interface, and so like maybe what I would do is make this like simple, and this is a UI menu horizontal. You can name it whatever you want. I'm just going to go ahead and save this, and then that way anytime I want to load that interface up, I could load that up and I'll show you here. I'll just load a UI, and I'll do one of my other interfaces that have got a bunch of different stuff on there, so you can see it loads that interface. And if I want to get back to that interface that we were just working on, I'll just load that that simple one, and you can see we've got our interface back. So I know I'm throwing a lot at you at this part, but what I really would like you to do is start understanding how to build your own little custom interface. Try these brushes out. Try making some fun shapes. Just explore and have fun with the program, and try not to get bogged down in the technical parts. And once you got some of this, just this part alone built, you're going to be able to have quite a bit of fun with the program, and really get a flavor of some of the abilities that you can have with this program to just make shapes quickly and do some fun sculpting. Okay, the next thing I want to show you is how we can add more parts or pieces, which ZBrush calls subtools, to this, and we can add other parts to our models. So what I got here is a situation where, what if I wanted to add something that felt like eyeballs to this? So in traditional sculpting, you might actually take small metal balls and push it into the clay and make sure that those metal balls can't be messed up. And then you can sculpt like eyelids around something like that. So let's look at a very similar process to that. So I'll go to the subtool area and open this up. And what we can do is we can hit the append button. And if you just click that, be careful with your cursor, because if you move it off too quick, the thing goes away. Hit append, and you got a bunch of different shapes that we can choose from. So I'm going to use the sphere 3D, and you can use cubes, cylinders. You can see what you got here. Let's go ahead and click the sphere 3D, and it's going to make this polymesh sphere 3D right there, like that. Now we're gonna have to get into the gizmo tool now. If you're used to any program like Maya or Blender, things like that, they've all got their own transform tool. So you should be familiar with this. If you've never really used sculpting programs before, or 3D, this might be a little bit news to you, but the gizmo tool is pretty self-explanatory. So you've got the move component where you can move in this direction. You can move here, you can move up. You've got a scale non-proportional this way. You've got a scale non-proportional this way. You've got a uniform scale in the center. And then you've got the ability to rotate within here. So what I'm going to do is just scale this down a little bit. I'm going to push it here, push it into this area, and get it to where it feels like an eyeball that I want for the right kind of size and everything else like that. Okay, and what I can do is I can rename this thing. I'll just call this eye, like that. And the next part for this is duplicating this. Okay, so it's possible that we could duplicate this eye, and I could just push this thing over, but that wouldn't be super accurate. I'd want this other eyeball to be exactly on the other side of the model. So what we've got here is in ZBrush, if you click and drag on the interface, this will be weird for new users. If you've ever used 3D Studio Max, you're probably used to an interface like this, so not a big deal. But you can see if I put my cursor right here in this area, it turns into this up and down arrow, and I can click and I can drag this. And if I want to open up the area for deformation, we can open this, and if I open that, it closes the other thing. Now if I want two things open at the same time, I can hold down Shift and click on this, so I got Subtool open, and I've got now deformation open. Okay, so the thing I want to show you is mirror, and I'm going to mirror on the x-axis, and how we know that is we've got this little face icon. This is going to mirror from this direction over, so I'll just click mirror. I got X. You could mirror in Y and Z if you wanted, but I just have it on X, and that pushes it over, and it's nice and even. So we've got a sphere on this side and a sphere on this side. Okay, so moving on from here, it's possible that we could take this, and if we go to the merge, there's a merge down. So like in Photoshop, if you merge layers, this one sits on top of here, we can merge that down to this. So it'll not actually join the geometry together, it just makes it into one model. So if I do a merge down, we've got that, and I'll hit OK for that. Okay, so now we've got our eyes together. Now, while we're building our interface, what I would like to do, I use this so much, I'm going to hold down Control and Alt, and I'm going to click and drag out. But remember from before, I have to go to Config, Enable Customize, and then I'll hold down Control Alt and drag that mirror out. And this is why I push this stuff off to the side, because I do want some of these things over here. Okay, so that's one way and one method of being able to do this. Okay, so if I go to Subtool, I'm going to go hide this little eye icon, and didn't hide it because it's selected here. If I select this part, maybe I rename this face, and now I've got the face selected. You can see the difference between this. So now that that's hidden, I can show and hide those parts and pieces. And when I'm working on the face, because this is selected, I can't sculpt on the eyeballs. All right, so I'm going to turn this off. I'm going to do this again and show you a different way. So we're going to hit append, and I'm going to pin the sphere again. I'm going to take it, we've got it on the gizmo tool. I'll scale this thing down. I'll push it off to the side, get that scale down to where I want it. Let's do something like this. Push it within through here. I want to scale it down even further. So I think that looks pretty good. Okay. So now we've got the ability, and I want to show you mirror and weld, and that actually takes the geometry and it mirrors it across. So if you ever get something messed up on this side of your model, we can mirror and weld. I'll show you that a little bit more in depth. But what I can do with this one is, I know that ZBrush mirrors and welds from one direction to the other, so it has to be on this side. We've already got our mirror set up, so I'll mirror it across like that. And let me just push this over here just a little bit like that. Okay. And now what I'm going to do is open up geometry. I'm going to hold down Shift and open up that menu too. And if we go to Modify Topology and open that up, they've got a mirror and weld tool. So I can click mirror and weld, and it mirrors this across and it welds it together. Because they're far apart, it doesn't really do anything as far as like welding it together. But let's grab this. I do think this is a tool that I use a lot. So hold down Control Alt. I'm going to click and drag this underneath the mirror. And now I've got a mirror, and I've got a mirror and weld. So to make this a little bit more obvious, I'm going to put this off of here and put this back on draw. If you want to select your subtools that you have, you can do it two different ways. You can come up here and you can actually select it. You can do it that way. Or if I'm on this one here, you can see it's highlighted and there's like a shift change in the way that it looks. If I hold down Alt and then tap on this part of the model, it'll switch between the two different subtools that I'm working with. So you don't have to go over to the stack here. You can just work this way like this. Okay, so I'm going to cause a problem for ourselves, and this happens quite a bit. I'm going to tap X. I'm accidentally turning off symmetry on this. Let's say I go to town on this thing and I start to build up some eyelids on this, and I'm like, okay, this is really cool, and I'm just not paying attention. And then I get done with this and I'm like, wow, it's amazing what I just sculpted for this eyelid, right? Problem is, I wasn't paying attention, and now I need to get this onto the other side. Okay, so let's just do that, and I'm not going to sculpt too much. Let's just make this like a little eyelid like that, right? And I remesh, and I go, oh man, I did not have symmetry turned on. What can I possibly do? If I click the mirror and weld, it's going to get rid of it because it mirrored from this direction over, right? So what we need to do is use this mirror. So we can flip-flop this thing. So I'm going to push it on this side, and now I'm going to click mirror and weld, and now I've got my symmetry back, and I can tap X, and I can start sculpting just like we're used to doing, and all is good in the world. And I've got my symmetry back and everything else like that. And so if you just learn this little workflow here, it'll make your life a whole lot easier, and you won't have to worry about if you mess up symmetry on there. You won't be so upset with yourself because you always have the ability to get that symmetry back. Now it does work with, so I'll turn off symmetry here. So if I am moving this thing out, you might notice this happens. You just have to be kind of aware of it. So this is pushed out, and now I do a mirror, and I've got it on that side, and I'll do a mirror and weld. You might notice like this line forms in between here whenever you do that, because it's literally chopping the thing in half and then welding it together. So if I hold down shift, I can just lightly smooth through here, and it's not that big of a deal. You might have to do a little bit of resculpting to get things back in the order or the way that you want it to be, but it's pretty forgiving for the most part. Okay, so that's a way that you can add some different subtools to the model. And again, I'm going to push this here like that, maybe resculpt that, tap X to turn on symmetry. Okay, so there's that. I'll rename this eyes 2. Nope, there we go. And I'll go ahead and append a new shape. So I'm just going to append, let's just do a cylinder. I'll push this here, and I'm going to move this up. And what I'm going to show you is how we can utilize primitives and then join that together with our model so we can start to build up things that are a whole lot more complex, right? So we've already looked at mirroring and welding like that. We did already look at how do we merge something down. So if I want these merged with the head, what I can do is push this up arrow like that, and you can see that's going to move it up or down in this stack. And now I can select this one, and I'm going to merge it down with that, like this, okay? And then now, whenever we Dynamesh, like right now it's just these two different models that have been, pushed together. So it's one model, but there's this natural barrier between them because this is still a piece of geometry and this is too. But with Dynamesh, if we go to that Dynamesh area and then we remesh, it actually fuses the two models together, and we can start sculpting on that as if it's one model. So this is pretty powerful as far as like what you can do with some primitive shapes. So I'll go back here and I'll append, and then maybe I'll do another sphere 3D on this one. I'll put on the gizmo tool, and if I click here, I can just kind of freely move this like that. So I've got that shape, and I'll push it here like that. I'll do the mirror and weld, and then I'll do that again. I'll push this up here, I'll merge it down, and then I'll remesh. And now I'll put this here, and I can just do that like that. Now, if your cursor ever gets away from you, you can hold down Alt and then click on a particular spot on the model. If you want, if the orientation is not the way that you want, you can hold down Alt and you can click this refresh, and that'll realign it with the world. If you hold down Alt and click here, on the home icon, it puts it at the home location, the 0, location of the world. And then this is go to the center of the unmasked parts. Now I have symmetry on, so that's why it's going over here in the center of it. If I tap X for this, hold down Alt and click on there, it goes to the center of the object like that at that point. Just some additional information about the gizmo, because I'm sure you're going to hit it and you're going to be wondering what the heck is going on. Okay, so I'm going to do one more. I think you get the point of this, but I just want to show you that this is pretty powerful for you to be able to use the primitive tools, and then you're able to make some cool shapes. And I'm just going to join this together with this, push this here like that, and I'll do the mirror, and I'll do the mirror and weld. I'll push this up here like that. Oops, one too many. Merge it down and remesh, and start to smooth that out. So this is a nice way of being able to get for yourself a base to start sculpting with, and then again, you've got, at any point, you've got all the different tools that we've been working with. And I forgot to turn symmetry on, and so we've got all the different tools. Those objects that you were doing before give you the ability to give yourself a base to start working with, and that gives you your foundation for what it is that you want to build for this thing. Okay, and I really didn't have any thought about what it is that I'm creating, so that's why this thing looks so weird, but maybe I'm trying to do some crazy alien ears or something like that. I don't know. So this is my space cat. There we go. And if you've ever looked inside of a cat ear, it's terrifying. Yeah. So we got something like that, and I'll just build the surface up like this, and then start to do some wrinkle patterns and smooth that out. And you can see after you learn the brushes, all this stuff goes by really fast. So if you've ever box modeled something and tried to make forms like this, if you're trying to go this fast with things, good luck. It's very difficult. So I really like the freeform nature of all this. Okay, so I'll stop sculpting because I could go keep doing that all day long and have some fun. But that should give you an idea of how you can make separate subtools, right? So they can be just models that you have that you're just working on, so you can start to make your model a whole lot more complex, and you could make a body structure, you can make eyes, whatever you want, or you could make those primitives, you could merge them together, and then you could treat that as something that you're building on and continuing on with the model that you have. Okay, the next thing that we're going to cover is masking. So masking is pretty cool. Now it is dependent on the resolution of your model. So if we're doing this DYNAMESH thing, you can see basically it's going to mask each one of these little tiny polygons. So that's just something to keep in mind for what you would consider the resolution of these masks that we're making. Okay, so it's pretty simple. We're just going to hold down Control, and you can see your cursor changes from red to this yellow color. And if you hold down Control and then just paint on the model, you can start making shapes like this, right? So if I was going to do some weird ear shape for this thing, I could do something like this. So if we want to take away from the mask, we can hold down Control and Alt, and that will start to subtract away from that, like that. The size of your brush obviously matters for this, and like I was saying, you can see the mask looks kind of rough, and that's due to the resolution of the polygons that we have on here. So if we, if we're using DYNAMESH, we could up the resolution if we want a nice, clean, crisp mask, okay? So something else that we can do for this, if we hold down Control, we can smooth the mask. If we hold down Control and then click on this, you see how it smooths the mask? And then we can hold down Control and Alt and then click on it, and it'll tighten the mask up. So sometimes that comes in handy where you want to kind of blur things out. I'm going to hit undo to get back to where we were here. Maybe I'll just blur it once and then tighten it back up. I have noticed whenever you blur it and you tighten, it can kind of round corners and things like that. So that might be beneficial to you. Okay. So something else for masking, if you hit Control I, you can invert the mask, or we can just click in here like this. I'm just tapping on this open part, and that inverts the mask for us. So obviously the mask thing, I'm going to put us on the clay buildup. It's going to hold that shape, and then we don't have to worry about sculpting and hitting anything else on the side of here, right? So again, if I wanted to do a shape like an ear, I could do that. So I'm just going to push this out a little bit like this, and if you remember, we can hold down Shift and we can smooth things out a little bit. And it's possible that you can use the mask to your advantage. And then if you're ready, let's do this. I'm going to hold down Alt, and I'm going to dig in on this part like that. If we're ready with this, we can hold down Control and then click on the masked part to smooth it out a little bit. So maybe that holds the shape for us, but then now we can hold down Shift and just lightly tap along there to smooth out that edge so it's not quite so rough like that. Okay? Now to get rid of the mask, we can hold down Control. Remember when we remeshed, we had to do this. We just hold down Control and drag, and that released the mask. And then if we hold down Control and drag again, that'll remesh for us. Okay, so that's how you release the mask, like that. Okay, so that's pretty much the basics of masking. Let's get into a little bit more advanced parts for this. So if I hold down Control and I drag on the outside of the mesh instead of drawing on it, it's going to allow me to drag out this square that we have like this. Okay, now that can be affected by the alpha that we choose. So if we go in here and we choose an alpha, and let's just do something like this star, and that'll make it really obvious. I'm going to hold down Control and drag this out. I can mask that with this star like that. I can hit Control I to inverse it, or I can do that, and you can see we can do a shape like that. So that's pretty darn cool. I'm gonna hold down Control again. I'm gonna try this shape here like this. Okay, so if I hold down Control and I click in here, and we see that there's different ways that we can draw this out. This is set to freehand, but if I do a rectangle and if I draw that out, it's going to be very similar. If I come here and I do square and I do center like that, now I can hold Control and I can drag this out on the model instead of doing it out here. I can do it directly on the model, and it's going to make it a pure square, and it's going to drag it out from the center, just like what it says. I'll put that back on the star, and you can see, so if we wanted to get a very specific shape on our model like this, it's possible for us to do that. Okay, now instead of using that, if I use drag rectangle, I like this one quite a bit. This lets you drag out and then rotate like this. Now you might notice the edges are kind of soft on this, and you might be going, well, that's cool. I want this ability to draw this out and rotate it, but I don't like this soft edges that it's got going on here. Well, that has to do with I'm holding down Control, and I come up here to this focal shift on our brush, and if we drag that to the left and put that on -100, this is basically a fall off for your brush. So that's going to make it super hard edged, and now we get the full shape that we got going on here. And let me do undo. So this one's a little bit trial and error, so I wanted this to fall right about here and be right here in this position. So it might take you a little bit to get used to that and then position it, but that becomes a pretty powerful thing for you to do. I'm going to go ahead and put this on freehand, and actually we're going to move away from there, and I wanted to show you this. We've already looked at the rectangle. We can put it on lasso, and this is pretty cool. Hold down Control and you can drag this out and draw like a polygonal shape. This comes in really handy for you know, characters and creatures and stuff. So if I wanted to get a very specific shape and go around there like that, I could do that. Remember, we can always hold down Control and Alt, and we can subtract shapes too. So just don't forget that you have that as a tool for yourself to work with, right? And we still have the whole Control click, Control Alt click to blur and sharpen with any of those. Okay, I'm gonna take it off this star. I'll put it on alpha none. And so we've looked at that. If we do dots, it's gonna be very similar to freehand. So that's just basically, you know, drawing on the model like that. And I do have this focal shift set to -100. If I do want a softer fall off, I'm holding down Control, and I'm going to put this back down to 0. So that's going to give us that nice soft fall off for this. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So we got the dots, the drag rectangle, color spray and spray work very similar. So I'll just put it on spray. But you can see it's going to do this like blobby kind of pattern. Now if I hold down Control on here, and if I go to placement and I push that up to 1, it's going to think of an airbrush, and it's taking like these particles and it's shooting them out all over the model, right? So that's pretty big. If I hold down Control and click on here and I choose a smaller alpha, I could do something like this, and you can see the pattern that we start to build up with this. Okay, the cool thing about working with masks is that this is not destructive in any kind of way, right? So if we get the pattern that we're looking for and we hit Control I and we want to start sculpting on this, we just have built that shape, and then now I can start to sculpt on this thing and then build it up. I'm going to turn off lazy mouse down here like that. The other thing is you can have a mask on and have it working, but If you don't want to visibly see the mask so you can see exactly what it is that you're sculpting, you can hit Control H, and that'll hide your mask. So the mask is working. You see it, I can't sculpt on anywhere on here, but the effects of the mask are still there. So we just hid the mask. And if I go to this area within here, remember we can click and drag on the menu and we can go to masking and we can open that up. A lot of these things that I was doing with stuff like clearing a mask and then viewing the mask, being able to you know, soften the mask, blur the mask, or sharpen a mask, all that stuff exists within here. They also have the ability to grow a mask, or you could shrink a mask too. There's also this boost mask as well. So there's some additional controls in there that you might want to take a look at for masking abilities within through there. Okay, so I'm just going to lightly smooth past that, and I'm going to hold down Control and take a look in through here. And then we do have a drag dot. So if I put this back on, I'm holding down Control the whole time I'm doing this. I'm going to choose this alpha shape on here again, and I can, with this dragging method, I can drag the mask around on the surface. Okay, where that comes in handy is if you've got to lay down, let's say I'm laying down a bunch of these stars and I want them to be all the same size. As long as I set the size with the brush, I can move these things around and add a bunch of stars or details and have them be very consistent and be the same exact size for stuff. Again, don't forget, I'm going to hit undo with all that. Don't forget, I'm going to hold down Control and then take the focal shift and I'm going to drag that down. So then we've got these really crisp stars, oops, like this. And now I can hit Control I and inverse like that. And I'll just put it on the clay buildup, make my brush kind of large, and I can hit Control H to hide the visibility of that, and then I could just sculpt these details onto the model. Okay, I'm going to hold down Control and get rid of that, hold down Control again, and I can remesh the model, and I might just smooth it out just like that. Okay, so there's a quick look at some of the different options for masking. It really does open up a whole lot of possibilities for you for what you can do. Before I exit out of this one part, I think there's something that's kind of cool that you probably would want to know about, and that's the ability to take a mask and then generate a shape, like a new subtool based off of that. So let's say I wanted to have this look like I'm going to make a mask around his eyes like this. Okay, I'm just going to join that together. And then, nope, sorry. I'm going to hold down Control and then just drag out like this. Keep working my way around the model, just like that. And I think that'll be kind of a cool shape to work with. Okay, so I've got my mask shape. Remember, we can hit Control I and we can inverse that. We can hold down Control and click like that. So depending on what you want to do with the shape, if I wanted to do the inverse and make this into a shape, just inverts the mask. So we got this going on here. I'm going to open up the subtool area. I'm going to scroll down towards the bottom, and you can see that there is an extract area. And if I hit extract, it's going to give me this certain thickness of this model like this. And if I just rotate, it's just a preview. So don't worry, just hit extract. You can take a look. I want this to be a bit thicker, so I'm going to put this at 0.05. Hit extract, and then maybe I want it just a little bit larger, 0.075. Let's try that, and I'll hit extract, and that works for me. I'll go ahead and hit accept, and then that will make that into a brand new subtool that we've got in through there, just like that. Okay, so you can see we've got the old one. It's still going to have the mask. And I'm going to hit solo so we can just see that. Solo lets you just visibly see whatever you've got selected, whatever subtool, and hides everything else temporarily. It's still there. Yeah, but it just kind of hides it for you. So you can see we still have the mask and it's still there. If I want to get rid of the mask, I can do that. So I'll go here and turn it off solo. if we put on polyframe, you can see what it does for us. It makes this new piece of geometry, and it also gives a polygroup for the inner part, the outer part, and then the rim for this. I'm going to show you a tool real quick that I use quite a bit, and it's Polish by Feature. I'm going to put this on my interface because I do use it quite a bit. I'm going to go to Preferences, Config, Enable Customize right there, and I'll hold down Control and Alt, and then click and drag Polish by Feature, and I'll put that right here. What that does is if we drag the Polish by Feature, it tries to smooth this thing out. So one of the cool things about this is if you notice, I'll turn off the polyframe, it makes a mask on here, and it leaves these unmasked, so you can do this Polish by Feature thing, and it works rather well. So this little donut hole thing, having the plug inside of there, makes it to where it runs this Polish by Feature along the outer edges, but if you click that off, it makes it super powerful, and it has a really big effect, and it really smooths it out quite a bit. So I'm going to get rid of this mask, hold down Control, and just drag in here, and that'll get rid of the mask. Now if I do Polish by Feature, look how clean that shape is that it's going to make for you. Okay, so that could be a way that you could make a mask, turn that into a new piece of geometry, and you can get a pretty clean thing going on here. And then if I want to turn that into DYNAMESH, I can just go to this area under Geometry, go to DYNAMESH. I'll make the resolution like 256 and turn on DYNAMESH. Now you can see it's going to eat up the edges a little bit. If you want it to be super crisp, you're going to need enough topology for that, so I had to put the resolution up a little bit on there. So that looks pretty decent. The other thing is with the whole DYNAMESH thing, it does keep your polygroups, and we can run this Polish by Feature thing after the fact. And now we're in DYNAMESH mode, and we have a pretty clean mesh and a pretty clean shape for things as well. So that's pretty cool. So I just wanted to show you that addition because that becomes a pretty powerful way for you to go ahead and be able to add new pieces to your model and make them separate subtools, and just be able to extract it from the shape that you're working on already. So what I want to show you now is the ability to use a thing called polygroups. So I'm going to turn on the polyframe on this, and I'm going to hold down Alt and click on this piece here. And polygroups lets you basically make these grouping information on your model to make it very easy to show or hide parts. And then you're able to actually split the model apart based off of these groups as well. So one way that we can do this is visibility. So if we hold down Control and Shift and then we drag over our model, you can see that that's going to give us a positive, this green. So it's going to show any part of the model that we have like this, and it's going to hide the rest of it. Okay. Now if I hit Control W, let's open up this polygroups area, and I'll show you what we're working with here. And if we do this group visible polygons, if we hit Control W, the hotkey for that, that will make that into a new group. Okay, so I want you to get used to this Control Shift thing because we're going to be using this quite a bit in this section. Control Shift, and we just tap in the open viewport, and it'll bring back the visibility of everything. Okay, so what was so special about what we just did? Now that we have these groups set up, we can hold down Control and Shift, and if I just want to see the blue part, I can tap on it. And if I want to see the inverse of that, I can Control Shift drag in the open viewport, and you can see it's going to give me the inverse of what the visibility is. And if I want to bring everything back, I hold down Control Shift. Instead of dragging, you just tap, and it'll bring everything back. Okay, so I'm going to show this red part. So if we do Control Shift and just show this right here, I'm going to show you another part to this. Okay, so we looked at Control Shift, and then that will do a positive, and if we drag that thing out, and if we add the Alt modifier to it, it turns into red and it becomes a negative. So we can hide that part that we have there. Okay, so I'm going to hit Control W, or we can do this group visible again, and that made a new polygroup for us. And if we want to bring everything back, Control Shift tap, and then that brings everything back. Now it's probably looking pretty weird because this looks like the same color as this. It just randomly throws colors on here. Now if I hold it on Control Shift like that and I hit Control W to make a group, I can just keep spamming Control W to cycle through colors that I might want. These colors don't really matter, they just help you with organization. You turn off the polyframe and you're not even going to know that they exist. So now you can see we've got a polygroup here, here, and here, and we've got one in the back too as well. Okay, so I'm going to hold on Control Shift and I'm going to click on here, and you can see that we've got a top and we've got a bottom. These are considered islands right now because there's nothing touching geometry-wise this top part to this bottom part. They are the same polygroup right now because of the way that we built them, and if we want to split those apart into separate islands, we can click the Auto Group button like that. And we can keep spamming that if you want to change and find the right color combination that you want. Now if we hold on Control Shift, tap in the open viewport, we can bring everything back. Now we've got, this is a polygroup, 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 polygroup. And if you take a look at the red is together right now. So if we hold on Control Shift, tap on that, we've got the front and we got the back. The reason we only see the front side of this is ZBrush only draws front-facing polygons, so you're not going to see the back side. They do have something under display if you wanted to change that. I don't suggest it. There is a display properties and you can do a double on there to see both of them if you want, but I don't think it's necessary. Okay, I'm going to go back to the polygroups area. I'm going to click this auto groups again, just like that, and now we've got this as a front and a back. Hold on Control Shift, just tap like that. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is show you it's possible with these polygroups to actually join things together after we've made these groups. So maybe I did all this work and I want this purple together with this tan color here. So what I can do with this is hold on Control Shift, I've got the tan part, and then I can hold down Control Shift and I can actually tap on that part and it'll give me the inverse. Or we looked at holding down Control Shift and then dragging. That's a possibility. So now the part that I want is not visible, and I can keep adding to this. So I can hold down Control Shift and I can click on this next part, and you can see now I've got all the pieces hidden that I want to turn into a polygroup. And so we've got to just do a little bit of thinking here, and we can hold down Control Shift and then drag, and now we've got the inverse of that. And if I've got these together now, I can hit Control W, which was that group visible. I can keep spamming that. And now that whole shape is just a polygroup. I just held down Control Shift, then clicked to bring this all together. Okay. All right. So I did show you in the video part before where we're taking a look at masking. I put this on the interface here. If I hold down Control over this, you can see this is under the deformation area, polish by feature, and it looks at polygroups. I'll turn that off, and if I polish this, you can see it does a nice rounding kind of effect to it, like that. It makes it kind of clean, and you can see I'm starting to get really clean lines on here too. Eventually we'll take a look at just separating these out and making different parts based off the polygroups, but just for now, I'll leave it the way that it is. Okay, I'll turn this polyframe back on. The next thing I want to show you is the ability to make polygroups by a cutting tool that ZBrush has. Okay, so if I hold on Control and Shift, you can see that our brush changes from sculpting brushes to maybe a selection brush in this drag rectangle that we have here, or this rectangle. If we hold on Control Shift and click in this area, we've got a whole bunch of tools that we can choose from within here. And what I wanted to show you is this slice curve. Now slice curve, I'm going to show you how this works, but there's some similar stuff with there's a slice rectangle and there's a slice circle. So if you wanted to do slicing through the model with a circle, you could do that, or a rectangle there. Let's look at the curve. This one's the most complex one out of the bunch. So what I can do is I can start to hold down Control Shift, and then when I drag out now, it's got this line that's kind of shaded like this. Okay, the shaded angle doesn't really matter too much on this brush, but you can see I clicked Control Shift and I started to drag this thing out. If I hold on Control Shift again, it turns it into that visibility thing we were doing before. And if I click Control Shift again, it's going to turn it into this line. Now we can add the spacebar modifier to this to move this thing around, and you can move your cursor around, and you can see how we can move it in this direction. So I would try that out a little bit, just get used to this. I've let go of Control Shift while I'm doing all this. As long as I've got my pen held down, I can rotate it like this. And if I tap the spacebar and add the spacebar modifier to it while I'm moving around, I can move the line like this. Okay. And so if I drag this line out and I tap Alt, it's going to give me a curve for this. And again, I can do this line. I can add the spacebar modifier to it at any point. So this is how we can get a nice curve to it. If I tap Alt again, I can start to do a curve here, tap Alt again like this. And now if I wanted to do a straight, instead of just tapping Alt, I can double tap Alt really quickly, and I can get a nice, crisp, clean corner on there. So I'll double tap Alt again. This is outside of the model, so it won't really matter, just to show you how to make this line. And then when I let go, it slices through the model based off of that curve that we made. Okay. Now we did look at a previous part of the video, and I made this on the interface. If I hold down Control on Mirror, you can see where that exists under Deformation Mirror, and then Mirror and Weld exists under Geometry, Mirror and Weld. So I want to keep this side, and I want to have it on both sides. If we do the Mirror and Weld right now against the X-axis, it only pushes from this direction over, if you remember that. So I hit Undo. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to mirror it across on this side, and I want to keep that side, and then now I'll hit Mirror and Weld, and you can see what I've built with that, with the slice curve like that. Okay, so because using that, let's add to the interface just a little bit more. So I'll click on this Enable Customize thing there, like that, and then if I go to my brushes, I'm going to hide this real quick. And if you don't see brushes here, we can go to Brush, click this little icon, click and drag it over. So it should actually show you inside of here. Here's the slice curve icon. And if we hold on Control and Alt and then click and drag that out, we could add that to our interface. The other thing is, I might want to do this as a selection rectangle. So if we hold on Control Shift and then drag this out like this, let's do this. Sorry, I'm going to hold on Control Shift and then put this back on the select rectangle like that, and then that would be a good one to have. Control Alt, and I've got that. And I think I'm going to rearrange these. I'm going to put the select rectangle, and I'm going to show you the select lasso. So if you hold down Control Shift and then go in here, there is a select lasso. So let's grab that and put that on the interface. Control Alt drag like that, and then we've got our slice curve that we did before. Okay, so now I can go to here to this part, and if I hold on Control Shift and I start to drag out, look at this. We've got the selection right here, and then we're using the lasso instead of the square like that. Okay, and we can do Control Shift and then drag that out, and we can add the Alt modifier to that, and we can do a negative on there. And if we hold on Control Shift, we can tap and bring everything back. So that's the difference between the selection and the select lasso, and now we've got this slice curve on there. So I think those are some pretty good options for you to be able to build some polygroups. Again, if I want to make a very specific shape within through here, I'm going to hold down Control Shift and then I'll click on that. That's a good thing to show you real quick. We're not quite ready there for this, but if you have it on Select Lasso, if you hold down Control Shift, you can click on an edge and it'll actually hide based off of the edge loop of things. Maybe that comes in handy. That's probably a little bit too advanced for you, but I'm going to hold down Control Shift and then click back on that select rectangle. Click on this, and then I'll put it on this select slice curve and I'll say skip until next restart. So again, Control Shift will drag out, and I'll tap Alt to make a curve. I'll double tap Alt to make a straight, double tap to make a straight, and we'll do something like that. I'll hold down Control Shift, click to bring back visibility. I want this on both sides. Now it projected that line through, so you can see this shape on this side is what I want, and it's not exactly the same on here. But remember, we can do this. I'm going to mirror that across on this side, and then I'm going to do mirror and weld, and so it's going to push that on the other side and then join it together. And then what I'm going to do is we're going to do the polish by feature. I'm just going to run that just a little bit, and remember, we can, if you run it quite a bit, it starts to really smooth this thing out, and it starts to really respect those polygroups that you have, so you can get some really cool mechanical kind of cuts that are super clean just by doing a few things on your model. You really don't have to do a whole lot to get that effect going on there. Okay, so there's a little bit about polygroups. There's a little bit about some of these slicing features, maybe how we can select with visibility, and then also the square visibility, but then also doing lasso as well. So try those tools out for a little bit and see what those combinations give you. And I know it's a little bit to kind of take in and wrap your mind around, but after you get that, you've got a whole lot of options for how you can organize your model and get it broken into different pieces. Now, speaking of breaking things into different pieces, let me show you this last component here. Let's say we want to break off the top part of this here and here, and I'm gonna split the model into like a top and then this bottom part. So with our polygroups, I'm gonna hold down Control Shift. I'll put on the select rectangle right there. Control Shift, and I'll click on this piece. I'll click it again with Control Shift, and then I'll select this piece by holding down Control Shift and then clicking on that piece again, and then that gives us this bottom part is visible. Again, we can hold down Control Shift, and we can drag in the viewport to flip flop if you want to do that. It's up to you. Now let me show what you got. We can go to Subtool, and they've got a split. Okay, so there's a couple different things that they've got on here. So you can do this split hidden, and if I do that, it's going to split the hidden part of the model into another subtool. You'll also see that they have this groups split. Now it will split it apart by polygroups if you want, but it's grayed out because we have some of the model hidden. So let's do this. Let's go ahead and say split hidden. And then now that just broke that into this. If I put it on solo, you can see here's the top part and here's the bottom part, like this. And I might just rename this real quick. Call this top, and I'll rename this bottom, like that. Okay, so now we're split into two different pieces right here, like that. Now you can see this. See how group split is available? And that's because now this is its own separate subtool, and nothing's hidden on it. And we've got these different polygroups. And if we wanted to split this apart and make this a model, this a model, this a model, we could do that by hitting groups split. So let's just go ahead and do it. I'll hit group split, hit OK. It's an undoable option, so be careful. Make sure you really want to do this. I'm going to hit OK for that. And now take a look. I've got it on solo, so I cannot see the other parts. But now I've got this bottom. I've got the back part. I've got this side part here and here. And then I've got this bottom. Well, it says bottom, but it's this front part that we see here, like that. Okay, so just like splitting apart, it's possible that you can merge things together as well. So if I wanted this part merged together with this part, I would have to move this up in the stack right here. So I could take this and let's just say merge down like this. And so now that's joined those two pieces together. And if I wanted this side part joined together with, let's see, this, I would have to move this up. So that moves this up in the stack, or it moves this down in the stack. But I want to merge this down together with this. So I'm just going to click merge down like that. And then now this is merged together. If I hold down Alt, I can just click on the pieces that I want. So now this is a new object subtool. This is a subtool. And then this is a subtool. Okay. Now the next part I can do is show you that we can take those shapes and then we can turn each one of these into DYNAMESH. I do want to show you what's going to happen with this because there's nothing inside of here. And what's going to happen whenever we DYNAMESH this, it's going to try to fill that in with something. So you can keep sculpting on this. You're probably going to get seams in between your parts and pieces. Maybe you want that, maybe you don't. I'm going to at least show you what happens whenever we DYNAMESH this. So we'll go to Geometry and we'll open that up. And we'll go to DYNAMESH. I'm going to put a resolution of probably like 512 just to start with and see what happens. And then I'll hold down Control and drag to remesh like we did before. And check this out. It filled in that hole for us. It's maybe not the exact shape that you want, but at least filled in with some geometry for us. Let's turn off the polyframe and you can see what it built for us. Maybe it looks a little bit rough. But remember what we have here on our interface. We put this polish by feature on here. And if we hold down Control on this, remember if you can take a look at the bottom, you can see the button path. It's under deformation, polish by feature. I don't have the donut hole on. I can drag this over to the right a little bit, and it's going to polish that surface up, and it's going to make it nice and clean. I'll turn off solo so we can see what's starting to happen with that. Now, that shape's going to pull away from there a little bit. That's okay. It's to be expected. Okay, one more thing that I would like to show you about the polygroups is we're turning on and off this polyframe, and you can see depending on the density of your model, it might be really hard to actually see your groups. It's possible that you can actually turn off the line on here so you can just see the colors and the shapes, and that comes in really handy. Now you might want to just turn off the colors for the fill so you can do that. So those options exist within there. But that should give you a pretty good overview of what you can do with some of these polygroups, making it very easy to show and hide parts and being able to split the model apart based off of the groups that you have. So do a little bit of experimenting with that and see what options you can come up with and what cool kind of workflows work for you. Okay, we've already talked a little bit about primitives and how you can append those. I wanted to show you another option that they have for adding primitives that I think is a better option for being able to create things and have a little bit more control over that. Let me show you what I mean by that. So if I click off on this area, let me do this. I'm going to click here, and then I'm just going to click on this sphere 3D. Okay, so any of their primitives that you start off with, like the cube, sphere, any of those, they're going to have parameters to control the type of geometry that you have for this. So if you take the interface and you scroll down to initialize down here, each primitive is going to have their own set of things that you can do. So you can see I can align this on the X, or I can align this on Y or Z, and all this stuff is live. And we've got size, so you control that, size X, Y for that, and Z. And so we've got that. We've got coverage, so you could control that. And you also have a division of geometry in here. So if I did like 4 and 4, let me make sure num lock is on. So I'll do 4. I'll do 4. You could do shapes like this, right? If I went 3 with that, we could do this. If we went something like 8, we can get something like that. And then if I do a divide, keep going up with this, 5, 6. I think you get the point. You have control over that of exactly how you want the geometry to be created for this. Okay, so this is all live. You can't sculpt on it, and you can't really do much to it until you click this Make Polymesh 3D button. So that's a little bit confusing, especially at the beginning whenever you're first starting off with this stuff. I will put this at 64 by 64, like this, and then I'll go ahead and say Make Polymesh 3D. So that turns that into an actual piece of geometry that we can start sculpting on, we can start manipulating it and everything else like that. If you go to the subtool, you'll see it says PM 3D Sphere 3D 1. So that's PolyMesh 3D. So that's how you can kind of tell the difference between that and you know, just the version that is got the initialize on there, and you can do the different options for it. Okay, so I definitely want to point out the fact that that's going on. I like the ability to be able to control and change the options for these things, but what doesn't seem so great is that you have to do this off in its own little vacuum. Then you have to say, hey, I like the options I've set for this, and then now I can start using it. But that becomes pretty confusing whenever you want to maybe use it together with some other objects and see how they relate to each other. Let me show you what I mean by this. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this, right? And I'm going to go ahead and put it on the gizmo tool, and I'm just going to move it up like this. And so we've got two different versions of that sphere that we have here, okay? So if I wanted to add a cube to it and I wanted to have very specific resolution to the cube, it would be not good for me to be able to have to do this off to the side like this, do the options, push it over to this other thing, move it to the right spot. Okay, so let me show you the alternative that they have for this. So we've got two different objects. We've got it on the transpose tool, and if you go to the gear icon right in here, let's go click that. You can at any time change this to one of the primitives that they have. So here's a cylinder. Let's say I don't like the orientation of this cylinder. I can click back on the gear icon, put it back on the gizmo tool, then I can use this and I can rotate this into position just like this. Let's make sure I'm rotated the right way there, and I can scale it down, and maybe I push it down and I want it to intersect with that just like that. Okay, so then I can go back to the gear icon, go back to cylinder 3D. Here's what I think is cool about this. So we've got the controls on here, and you're going to have to hover your cursor over each one to see what they are. Hover cursor over that, it'll give you some information about that. So we've got this H divide, and I'll put this on 16. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to get like some exact numbers on here. So that's one thing I'm not a huge fan of this, but we go to this divide and we can get divisions going this way and through here like that. Okay, so that's pretty cool. We can come back into the gear icon, and what I think is also pretty neat about this is that we can switch this out. So say we first tried a cylinder and like, nah, I think I want the cone. We can switch it over to the cone, and the cone's got its own set of controls for this, for the divisions that way. Maybe I want to try the polycube, and we've got options for that too, and we've got divisions in each one of these axes. So each one of these are going to have different controls, and it's going to allow you to change these out. Now this one's going to look funky too, so again, what I would just suggest is just hovering your cursor over this, trying out some of the different options for things. You can see here we've got a twist modifier too, so it can twist this in and out. We've got divisions going this way, so you can go all the way down to 3. You could do 4 like this, and if you did that, you might want to twist it out specifically maybe here to make a ring if you wanted to. We've got an inner radius, and you've got an outer radius. Oh, that's a taper, sorry. So we've got this this radius here for that. You got divisions going this way, and I might do 28 somewhere around there like that, and then you got the coverage thing again. So again, each one of these has its own thing on here, right? So you can try it out. What I do think is pretty powerful is if we start with one of these primitives, and then you're like, hey, I want to duplicate this. I'll go ahead and take it out of the gizmo, or take it out of the primitive mode, put it in the gizmo. Then I can move this up. Maybe I want to swap that out for a cone, and then I will go ahead and do the gizmo tool and then push this up. If we're kind of careful about this, you could get this to all kind of line up and everything else like that, right? And so we've also looked at being able to take this stuff, merge them down. So I say merge down, and so that's seen as one object like that right now at this point. And then what I'll do at that point is just go ahead and say geometry, DYNAMESH, let's go 512. I'll DYNAMESH it together, makes it nice and dense like that. And then now I'll make it one poly group. So I'm going to use the power of this polish by feature that we looked at before, which would polish each poly group, which I could run that like that, but that's not exactly what I want. So if I hit Control W, if you remember the hotkey for that, that just makes a poly group out of everything that's visible. And then now I can use this polish by feature as just a really strong polish mechanism like this. Okay, so that's a way that you can take some of your shapes together, use the primitives, and then be able to make more complex shapes out of that. And then you could just take this stuff and you can start sculpting on these things and start like really making some more like cool designs and stuff like that. So that's a way to get some nice shapes going and use the power of primitives, and then be able to more interactively take a look and see exactly what it is that you're trying to build as you're building these things. Okay, I just showed you how to create primitives using the gizmo tool and some of the options for that. I also showed you how to take those objects, merge them together, and then make that into a new, DYNAMESH version that's solid. The problem is if I convert this stuff over exactly the way that it is, when I convert this stuff over, it's going to have all this faceting in there, and DYNAMESH does a really good really good job of taking whatever that version of that thing is and then just making it into DYNAMESH. So if I see all this faceting in this model, it's going to show up there. What I want to show you right now is how do we make really clean models and then DYNAMESH. Okay, so that same scenario that we have two different objects. We've got this sphere here, and we haven't really talked about subdivision levels. I'm just going to use divisions in the model to make this more smooth. So if you go under geometry, if you go to divide, you can see the hotkey for that is Control D. So I'll just click divide, and I'll click it one more time, and you can see now we've got multiple divisions to this thing. There's a whole lot more geometry, and we can step up and down in the subdivision levels. So if you hit Shift D, that drops you down in this slider, and if you tap D, it goes up to the next subdivision level, and I'll hit Shift D to go back down. Let me explain to you what's going on here with this. Whenever we divide, it's got this subdivision smooth modifier on there. So it takes every single one of these quads and it divides it into 4 quads, and it does a smoothing algorithm on it. So it adds more geometry. So if I tap D to go up to the next one, I'll turn off polyframe and then turn it back on. You can see each one of those quads that we had gets segmented into 4 quads. And then if we go up to the next subdivision level, we'll tap D. Let me turn this off and then turn it back on, because it doesn't recognize that new change with the polyframe until we turn it off and turn it back on. You can see now we've got more geometry here. Now if we hit Shift D, you should be able to see it step down. So I can tap D and you can see what's going on here with the more divisions. Okay, so that works for that part. If I hold down Alt and I click on this piece and we go to divide it and I go 1, 2, 3, it works, but probably not what we're looking for here. So what can we do to hold these hard edges that we have on here, at least on the top part? Well, I was telling you about polygroups before. We didn't look at this option. If you go to the polygroups area, there is a groups by normal, and I'll just leave it by the default max angle of 45 degrees. So if it's got a 45-degree change in the topology, it'll go ahead and make a polygroup based off that. I'll just click group by normals, and then this should work for that. You can play around. If it's not giving you like catching everything you want, you can drop it down to like 15 or 10 or even lower. You might have to find a sweet spot for whatever that particular piece of geometry is, but this works fine. This is like greater than a 90-degree bend, so anything under that should catch this. So it's going to make a polygroup out of the top, the side, and I'm going to solo that, and you can see it's going to make it on the bottom too. Okay, so if I divide, hit Control D, that's not still going to do anything for me. But if we go under geometry, if we go to crease, they do have this thing called crease PG. So it's crease polygroups. Now there's this crease level, and it's by default set to 15. That means you could divide it 15 levels before this creasing information goes away and rounds out. Now we can use this to our advantage if you wanted to do any kind of like soft beveling after a certain amount. So I'm going to put this down to, I'm going to hold it at 3. And so that'll give it 3 divisions. And then after that, then it's going to start rounding out. You'll see what's going to happen with this. So I'm going to set it to 3. I'll click Crease Polygroup. And now I'm going to divide the model. Control D, right here like this. 1, 2, 3. And then watch what happens after we start dividing after that. See how it starts to round that out? So let me turn off the polyframe for that. And you can see it's going to hold that shape, and it'll hold it nice and tight until we get to that third level, and then after that, then it starts to round out. I'll add one more divisions to it just to make it nice and clean, right? So if you didn't want that, I'm going to hit undo to get back to where we don't have any divisions, and I'll just put this back up to the default 15 crease polygroup, and then now I can hit Control D, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you can see it's going to hold that edge super crisp for us. Okay, so I'll turn it off solo on there, and then now I'm going to go ahead and take this. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use the merge. I'm going to merge it down just like we did before, and then now what I'm going to do is go into geometry, go to the DYNAMESH area, and then put that on 512 like we've been doing, and then turn on DYNAMESH. Because we have subdivisions, it's going to say, hey, do you want to freeze the blah, blah, blah? No, I don't want that. So just let it do its thing. And then this is now DYNAMESH. And you can see it's nice and super clean for these objects that we have within through there. If we do what we did before, we can hit Control W, and that'll make one polygroup out of whatever is visible. And then now we could run the polish by feature. And you can see the results that we get. We get really clean shapes, and now we're getting like really nice transitions between the two. So I just wanted to point that out to you, that that's a way that you could take your different shapes that you've got. If you really want to hold those really crisp edges on there, still be able to divide it up. That might give you some options to play around with if you're going to do this method. And then that starts you off with a really clean model that you can start sculpting on top of. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about organization and being able to use folders inside of ZBrush. So as you start to get a little bit more advanced, you might be adding a few more pieces to your models, and you might want to try to start to organize some of this stuff, right? So you can go in the subtool area and you can make a new folder. And I'll just call this head. And this will contain everything for the head on here, and whatever I had selected, it's going to throw that in that folder. And if you want, you can just click on this and you can drag it into the folder like that, and you can see I've got my eyes, and maybe I want my eyes to be up here. You can actually click this and drag them and rearrange them. So, you know, if you want the hair on top, you could do that. And then just renaming stuff. So I got the hair, and then I'll call this like head for that, and then I've got my eyes, and that makes it pretty easy to understand what's going on, right? So I'm going to go ahead and append a sphere 3D, and I'll just select it. I'll rename that and call this torso like this, put it on the move tool, the gizmo tool, and I'll just push this down here like this, and then maybe this is the beginning of what the body would be for something like this, right? So I'll just do something like this, and then maybe pull it in here like that just a little bit. And then what I could probably do is accidentally and selected that in the undo history. What I could do is put this on the move brush, tap X, make the brush pretty large, and then I could just tweak the shape of this a little bit more, just to make it a little bit more specific for something like that. Okay, so this is my my shape for a torso. And then if I wanted to append another thing, and I'll do a cylinder, and I'll just select that. I'll put in the gizmo tool, then I'll scale this down and turn this into a neck like this, and we'll have something a little bit smaller. Maybe we'll put that right in through there like that. I think that's pretty good. Then I'll do this and just move this back just a little bit like that, and then I can rename this neck like that. And then I'll just go ahead and from this torso, I'll make a new folder, and maybe I call this body, and I can start to drag this in. Okay, so that makes it really easy for you to organize this stuff. You can move up and down in here. You can click on the folders to expand or contract them like that, so you can see what's in it if you want. All right, now that you're starting to understand a little bit about ZBrush, you might be wondering how you can speed up your workflow for stuff. So what I've got right now is if I tap 1, I can use my standard brush, 2, Damien standard, 3, clay buildup, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then 0. And so that becomes pretty convenient for things, okay? What I'm going to do is show you how we can set up some hotkeys. So let's go to Preferences and then go to Hotkeys, and let's go ahead and dock this over here. So I'm going to grab that in that corner and then dock it over here. So with the hotkeys, I've already got some loaded that I've already built that you just saw. And if I want to start making some new hotkeys, if I do this, if I hold down Control and Alt and I click on one of these, it will say, if I can't move my cursor, if you look up here in this area, watch what it says. Control and Alt, click on it. It says press any key combination to assign a hotkey, or if you want to, press Escape or mouse button to cancel or delete to remove. So I've already got one on there, so let's just go ahead and hit delete on that. So that's going to remove the hotkey on that. And I'm going to hold down Control and Alt, click on that, hit delete, because I've already got those two. So now I've got 3, 4, 5, and if I tap 1 and 2, it's not going to do anything for me anymore. Okay, so that's what's going to happen to you. You don't have any hotkeys set up. So let's say we wanted to make a hotkey for the standard brush. We can hold down Control and Alt and then click on it. And you can see it's going to say press any key combination to assign. I'm going to just tap 1, and it's going to say it's assigned to another interface thing. Hit OK to reassign it. I'm going to hit OK. And I'm going to do the same thing for this one. I'm going to hold down Control and Alt and click, and I'm going to tap 2, and I'm going to hit OK, just like that. So now I should be able to hit tap 1, 2, I still had 3, 4, all those set up on there like that. Okay, so that's how you can create the hotkeys. If you want to store them for future sessions, you need to click this store button, and then the next time you load up ZBrush, it's going to recognize those hotkeys that you set. Now, what I would always suggest is if you make a hotkey change, I would always save your hotkeys after you get them all set up, and then that way if anything happens to the program, anything happens to your computer, you can always go and load up those hotkeys that you've made, and it makes it real easy to do that. Okay, I believe if you click restore, that's just going to restore the default hotkeys that ZBrush has, and I should have probably done that at the very beginning of this session. Something else that I use quite a bit, you can see I've got a hotkey set for Alt S for doing solo. So solo lets you look at just one, whatever that subtool that you're working on, you can click that on pretty easily for that. And again, you can just hold down Control and Alt, and then you can do, combinations of stuff. So I did Alt plus S for that one and stored that as a hotkey. And I use that quite a bit for stuff. So there's maybe a few little other hotkeys that I do here and there for things. It's mainly like for polygroups and things like that. But I'll leave it up to you. Like anything in the interface, you could go and you could make a hotkey for that. And you can see for this one, for this auto groups, I did Control Shift plus W for that. So you can get pretty creative with the key combinations that you want to use to make sure that nothing in the program is using those type of key combinations. And if you use it quite a bit, you do that. And then this is just where you store it, and then you save your hotkeys, And if you want to load them for future sessions or load them on another computer, you can share this stuff. You can spit it out here. Okay, so that should help speed up some of your workflow at the very beginning of. Now that you have a pretty good handle on the program, let's take a look at how we can save our files. So the first way that we can save our file that is a very quick, I would say down and dirty version of saving, is this quick save right up in here. If you just tap on that, it'll make a quick save. You don't have to worry about the name. It's just going to store that in the information there. So if you tap the comma key to bring up the light box that you see here, there is a quick save area, and then this is going to be all the different quick saves that are done. Now ZBrush by default has some quick saves enabled, so after a certain amount of time it will do a quick save automatically and then save that, so then that way if the program crashes you can get access to that. So that's where that sits within there. Again, I do believe that's more of a down and dirty version of that, of saving. I wouldn't rely on that too heavily, but if you're just kind of working really quickly and you don't want to think too much about saving and you want to do a quick save just to make sure you're saving at least that part or that stage where you're working at, go ahead and do that. Know those quick saves that are built up in this area, eventually they go away because they get overwritten. So something else to keep in mind for that. Okay, so the real way of saving is to come up here and go to File and then do a Save As. And now you can see that I do have the undo history on with this version that I'm working on of this file. Okay, so the undo history is pretty cool. It lets you cycle through these different parts of the model and stuff like that, like what's been built up. The problem is that it will make your file sizes really, really large. So unless you really need to have, like if you really have a need to have this undo history on there, I would suggest turning it off like this, and then you do the save as, and it's going to prompt you and ask you where do you want to save this thing to. And I'm just going to put a version 5 on here like this. I do suggest that you make multiple saved versions. That way if anything happens you can always step back in history or time and get an earlier version. You can see here that this is one of the versions that's got a bunch of undo history on there, and you can see how big that file is. So it's you know, like 1.3 gigs. So this one is that I just saved here is only 104 megs. This one is going to be similar. So let's see what this says after we save this one. So it's quite a bit less on here, right? And again, that's because I turned off the undo history, and the previous version before this one did have a little bit of undo history, so you can see how that's kind of building that up like that. Okay, so anytime you're ready to come into the program and load, let's just simulate this. So I'm just going to double click this to load up a default project like this. And let's say we're just coming into ZBrush and you want to load your file. You go to File, go to Open, and then you can select the version that you have. Go ahead and hit Open, and it's going to open the file, and you should be able to have everything where you left off for things. Okay. So I don't want to confuse you, but there is another way of saving just your model. And let's say something gets corrupted in one file of yours. What we just saved is a project, so the project's going to hold all the models in this entire project and lighting information, like everything that has to do with the project. Okay, but what if you just wanted to like get this this head out, or like everything that you see in the subtool stack here? If you wanted to save this, you can come up here to the tool area and you can say Save As, and this will let you save out as a .ztl. So that's going to be a Z tool. Now that's just the model, and it has nothing to do with the project or anything else like that. But if we save that out, we can do this. Let me just rename this real quick. I'm going to do head, and I'll do version 2 like that. Okay, and I'm going to save this as a Z tool. So I've got it on here. I'm going to do head underscore version 2 like this as a Z tool, and then I'm going to go to our project, and let's go ahead and open an earlier version of this. So I'm going to go to the third version of this that's got the undo history on there that I was telling you about, And I did make some changes to this face at this time. So there were some differences in the eyes and things like that, and I don't know if you can really see that or not, but here, let's go ahead and load the tool that we had, which is this head version 2 of ours that we saved out as a Z tool. So we've just moved that thing from the other project, and if you take a look and see what happened there, it had a shift. So if I go to this version that you can see here, it's got these three things. When we saved out that other version, the eyes were moved on that, but it had our folder structure and our head, hair, and then the eyes. This one, this is the earlier version where I didn't have a folder, and so what I've done is basically combined in the same project those different models. Now, if I want to move this new head position, so let me just do this to make it like really obvious that there's a big change. I'll just move the eyes up like this. It's going to make them look a little bit more sinister, but let's do that. Okay, so I'm sorry, I just can't leave it like that. So I'm just going to dig in here just a little bit like that. And there we go. Okay, so definitely a different change. Head says head version 2, and I've got it selected. If I go to this other version here, so this is a whole nother subtool stack and whole nother subtool, right? And here's the old head. The name's not even correct on it. It says top. So I'll just call this head old, like that. And if I want to add that new head into this stack, what I'm going to do is click append, and you can see I'm going to find it within through here. Because it was selected in that other subtool stack, I can click on this head version 2, and it's going to add this version of the head in here like that. So quite a bit different, right? So we've got the old head here, and we can have them both on at the same time. Or I could turn the visibility of that off and come here and turn the visibility of that off. So that's a way that you can save your files, how you can save your models, how you can save that out as a Z tool, pull it into another version of the project of yours, and how you can move parts and pieces around between projects.